Thank you for attending. This is the Future of Cloud Communications panel. We have some excellent speakers up here you'll hear from in just a moment. The concept of this panel is the fact that it's undeniable that unified communications has moved to a cloud model for a lot of users. It's certainly been such a rapid growing area that all of you have seen the statistics about how much increase in business all of the providers are seeing in their cloud model as opposed to the prem type solutions. So what we're going to talk about is a number of things, everything from why, if the financial analysis favors prem solutions in a lot of cases, why is there such great growth in the cloud? We'll also talk a little bit about some of the concepts dealing with data security and integration and other potential reasons why cloud solutions have challenges that they have to overcome, and what does that mean going forward with the future. So the panel will be asked to discuss these issues, plus along the way you'll get their view of what they see as the future of this business communications model. Again, I'm J.R. Simmons. I'll sort of queue up a few questions as we go, and we'll also have a couple of mics. If there's a really good audience question, we'll make sure that a mic gets handed out so that you can ask those as well. I've been an independent consultant for over 30 years, so my point of view on the marketplace comes from the consultant point of view, from those end-user customers of mine. I'm also president of the Society of Communications Technology Consultants, which is an international group of independent consultants, and one of the organizations that helps sponsors this event as well. I'll let each of you gentlemen introduce yourself first.
All right,
Vishy.
Thank you, Jer, and thanks everyone for joining us this afternoon. My name is Vishy Gopalakrishnan. I'm with AT&T, and I have product portfolio responsibilities for our unified communications portfolio.
Hi, I'm Mike Wilkinson. I'm at Broadsoft. I look after service provider marketing at Broadsoft. So basically my responsibility is to work with people like AT&T to help them launch new product into market across all the main theaters, Europe, North America, and Asia.
I'm Steve Kokinos. I'm the founder and CEO of Fuze. And we bring a really great, simple user experience across voice, video, messaging, and collaboration to enterprises, typically 1,000 users and larger.
Curtis Peterson, I'm with RingCentral, and I am the head of worldwide operations and networking.
Okay, thank you. And just for clarification, Fuze used to be doing business under a different name?
That's right. Fuze was formerly Thinking Phones.
Yes, for those of you who might be familiar with that.
We acquired Fuze last year and then rebranded ourselves as Fuze.
Right. And so you see that on this panel we have some different points of view because you have folks that help supply the solutions as well as those dealing with the end user customers. So I think this will be an interesting group. So one of the questions I want to start with, and we'll have each of you speak to this in your own way, but we constantly hear from the suppliers, people selling the cloud solutions, that it's much more cost effective to go cloud. Now, a lot of the analysis done shows that it's not been more cost effective, depending upon what's been factored in, of course. And at the same time, it's in conflict with these statements that the ARPU, or average revenue per user, actually looks pretty healthy with cloud communications, which makes it a good deal for you. Why is it a good deal for the customers? How do you reconcile the fact that if you're making more money, it's still a great financial deal for them?
Yeah, I'm just going to start, and folks will join in here as well. I would frame it more in terms of value and the business outcome that you're after. And I think when you look at value, cost is just one of the elements of the equation. Because when we work with our customers, whether it's TCO or any other metric that you want to put in, is critical because most of the UC deployments that we do, cloud-based UC deployments, are typically multi-year transformations. Because they're not just about the acquisition of the technology, there's a much bigger deployment cost and then an ongoing lifecycle cost. So I don't think there's anything unique about cloud UC that's different from, I would say, other workloads that go into the cloud. I think cost is one of the elements. A lot of our customers look at parts of UC, whether it's pure voice itself, web conferencing, video conferencing, audio conferencing, and when they move to the cloud, the ones that we end up working with have the perspective that they don't consider the underlying capabilities that are at the heart of cloud-based UC as something that they are either A, equipped to deal at scale, and B, don't believe it's a prudent use of IT resources to focus a lot of effort into that. And I think what that points to is probably a maturation of cloud-based UC, where I think the IT organizations that we end up working with feel comfortable and assured that this is a workload, I'm talking generically, can actually be entrusted to the cloud. Much like they've entrusted other parts of their IT infrastructure, whether it's infrastructure as a service, PaaS, SaaS, they look at this as probably the next such kind of workload that can be moved to the cloud.
Mike?
Yeah, so we produce quite a lot of TCO tools for our customers, probably 1 or 2 a year. And if you look at the sort of sensitivities in there, a lot of the prem-based guys will go on a 5-year depreciation cycle, and they normally just look at capital costs. You don't start to look at training costs, the management overhead. If you look where cloud wins a lot, it generally tends to be in distributed environments where the overhead of managing those smaller offices is very significant. So you have to look at the context of what the TCO is and the type of enterprise deployment it's going into as well. The other sort of hidden cost, which I think a lot of people don't consider, is upgrade costs, okay? So if I want to do call recording, if I want to do video call recording in the cloud, you've got infinite capacity to be able to do that. If you're doing a prem-based solution, you have to think about potentially upgrading that capability on the prem-based solution. So, a lot of cloud providers have a philosophy of what I call positive discounting, which is they add more and more functionality into their offers and maintain a relatively stable price point into the marketplace, which again creates more and more value into the end user community. So, just taking a 5-year CapEx TCO argument doesn't really cut it. You need to look at what you need now, what you need in the future, what you don't even think you need right now. I mean, a lot of the guys are integrating things like enterprise messaging, contextual communication. There's a lot of Slack type functionality coming into the market. That wasn't envisaged 2 years ago, but it's going into the cloud platforms. The prem-based solutions probably won't have that, or you'll have to upgrade to the next hardware box to be able to do it, which is a significant cost. So cloud takes that away.
Okay.
Well, I think simply communications is a confusing, expensive mess for most enterprises. And when you dissect that, I think a lot of the discussions that go on in forums like this tend to be myopically focused on voice, or at least thought of that way. And if you look at PBX as one, there's surrounding telecom services, things like WebEx or GoToMeeting, messaging, video, audio conferencing, video conferencing, hardware and services. So when you look across that spectrum, 100% of the time there are savings to be had. But it has to be a more holistic view than simply looking at voice or some of the smaller subcomponents that are in there. And at the same time, it's a confusing mess for the end users, because when they have 4 or 5 different applications to choose from, it creates a terrible experience for them, which is why so many of these discrete applications have been so enduring. It's because simply people get used to one thing, and it's not a good experience, but it's what they're used to, and so they keep using it.
Okay.
One of the things we have to do with our enterprise customers is break their mindset of looking at a single channel, similar to what you just said. One of the things we add in there is productivity. So most enterprises leave that out of their equation. The average time to connect to a video conferencing service for all the services out there is approximately 11 minutes. It's 11 minutes from the top of the hour till you have all the people in the meeting. Some of you may join meetings where it doesn't even get started for 20 or 30 minutes. The average amount of time it takes to join one of the meeting platforms that we've run is 3 minutes. So what is 8 minutes times a couple of thousand video conferences a year worth to an enterprise customer? Start putting that math in, put the CEO's salary in there, and I don't think we have much issues with TCOs at that point.
Okay. So a follow-up question on costs. When we were looking at prem models over the last few years, there'd be a list price and nobody sold at list price. You're buying a prem solution, everybody had discounts. In fact, clients would often brag, well, I got 46 points off, so that's nothing. There was always this artificial number that's set up there. When we look at cloud solutions, more often than not, we're seeing a suggested price, and it might be a manufacturer's suggested price in some cases, or depending upon the sales model, whether or not it's the end organization that's supplying the pricing or not. But certainly we see less variance in what's the listed or suggested price and the actual user's purchase price. But larger and larger enterprises are entering this space, and they're demanding more concessions. So I'm going to start at the other end this time, just to be fair, but are you seeing the larger enterprises require, or are you responding with a different pricing model for the larger enterprises?
Absolutely. The larger enterprises do take a different approach on here. We're not selling Tesla cars at full list price on every one of them. It's a nice model to be in, by the way, but not this space. We take two approaches. The first approach is with large enterprises, they have very different workers. You have workers that need full collaboration, video, conferencing, file sharing, the whole 9 yards, mobile applications. And then, some of the larger enterprise customers we work with literally have over 1,000 what's called house phones. And they're basically a phone in the lobby you transfer a call to. Pricing those very differently in the seat helps us adjust for that particular enterprise pricing and market sales.
Okay. I'm not sure about the size of clients you've been chasing, Steve, but what is your response in this space?
Well, I think it comes down to total cost of ownership, and I think I'll echo some of the same sentiment here, which is understanding what people are spending today is very important. At the same time, we're seeing an increasing average revenue per user dynamic as people buy in more comprehensively to a broad set of capabilities versus sort of one or two different things. So I think for sure understanding what people are spending and getting to a price that makes sense for that and can show return on investment is very important, and that's just business. At the same time, having people buy into a view that there's 4, 5, 6 different applications that are being replaced at once, that leads to savings almost always and leads to a better user experience.
Okay. Well, now, Broadsoft has users attached through different customers that are all sorts of size of business organizations. So how do you scale the different directions?
So I think the first thing to make clear is we don't sell direct into the marketplace. We have a white label service, which some customers would then take back out into market. And I think if you look at where the price points are, the North American UC market is probably sitting in the sort of early 20s. Over here, between sort of £8 and £13, depending on the packages you're looking for. Sometimes it drops a little bit lower than that, depending on the deal that's happening. The cloud market started out as an SMB market, which meant that there was supplier power and not buyer power, right? Now we're seeing it's moving into a lot of deals coming at sort of 2,000, 3,000, 5,000 seats. So we're starting to see buyer power coming in and influencing that price point. I think the thing we haven't mentioned so far is the channel that sits in the middle of this as well. And there's quite a large discrepancy in terms of the margins being handed on to the channel by the service provider to sell the service into market. So, some of the channels out there today are doing significant volumes, and they're getting a lot better deal from the service providers that they're taking service from. And, if you look at Germany, there's one service provider, who I won't name, who did a deal with a very large other service provider, and they dropped their channel margin significantly or increased, basically passed on a lot of margin through to that service provider, which was then passed through into the marketplace. So I think we're going to see a lot of channel deals done, which will again affect the street price in the marketplace. But with the buyer power, I think you are seeing some pretty significant discounts coming through as well.
Okay. Vishy?
I'd say at AT&T we deal with customers of across the entire spectrum, whether it's the 2-person florist or the 5-person pizza restaurant, all the way up to Fortune 50 multinationals. So it's kind of difficult to generalize, but I would say there's no surprise. I think the higher up you go in the market, the expectation is that you have to be extremely price competitive, and in most of the situations as we go up market. Cloud UC, again, is one element of a bigger transformation that the customer is embarking on. And so typically there's a much bigger portfolio that we're bringing to bear. And so that gives us some flexibility as we deal with some of those large customers who have a diverse set of needs, and UC being one of them.
Okay. We might come back a little bit to costs later on, but let's switch topics for a moment. So the safe harbor rules that were invalidated back in October, that affected in a lot of cases how we were looking at data and data privacy, where the data is being stored. And some of the new rules that are being suggested, I think it was only this last week, that a European watchdog group called WP29, it's Article 29 Data Protection Working Party, they said that the replacement rules, the Privacy Shield agreement that was meant to replace it, looks very inadequate. It's not robust enough, it's not clear enough, et cetera. So there's a lot of uncertainty right now in this space. And I guess the question I'd like you to sort of address is questions around, from your perspective, who owns the data? How can we make sure that the data is not only secure, but like if a client were to cancel a contract, what happens to that data? So there's some general discomfort, let's say, in the marketplace around this concept of where is the data and how do I know that it's going to be safe? Mike, I'm going to start with you just to have somebody else go first. What's your take on this whole situation?
So you asked the marketing guy, right?
Yeah, of course.
I think the discussions we've had with the service providers that were rolling out across Europe has been that we have to put up local data centers in market. Okay, that has been a mandatory requirement right from the get-go, right across Europe. So if you go into Germany, you have German data centers. You go into France, we have French data centers, UK data centers. We have done that right across the board. In terms of user privacy, okay, our solution is a multi-tenant solution. It's used by pretty much the who's who of the service provider community out there today. We have some national networks with 10 million users running on them today. So we have a very high degree of security built around the product and privacy built into it. In terms of the workflow, so people canceling off contract, okay, that's managed within our OSS BSS systems, and it's an actual part of the workflow that's built into that, which we do for our customers in the white label situation, okay? To be honest though, I actually don't see that much churn off a lot of our customer base today. I mean, it's pretty insignificant, and especially as you move up market. But as I said, I'm a marketing guy. I probably can't drill down into the operational detail of what we do in terms of the day-to-day management of this service. So maybe some of the other guys are probably better versed at this one than me.
Okay. Steve, what are clients telling you about their concerns with data?
Well, I think there's sort of a bigger question, which is, so what the law specifies is one thing, but what we hear from people like everyone here in this room is something different. And so what we're finding is people's own security requirements are often more stringent than just what the legal requirements are in any given country. And so certainly factoring in where data lives at rest is important, but also it's about policies and procedures, how we run our operation, how we ensure that we have a very high level of security. And I think one of the benefits of a cloud solution is that we do have an entire professional team of people that thinks in concert with our engineering folks about how security is an integral part of everything we do, and then from a technical operations standpoint, how that again is an integral part of what we do. And so I think when you really boil that down, one of the things moving to the cloud does represent is the opportunity to have better privacy and better security than anyone would have in their own organization. And so that's really the approach we take, which is ultimately we should be the best at doing this of anybody out there.
Well, I'm curious though, Curtis. I mean, there's a lot of data that's gathered. There's user information, configuration data, recordings, just so much data. Do you tell customers it's all encrypted? What do you have to tell the customer other than we're good at it? What kind of reassurances are you being required to give them in order for them to trust that your data storage of their information is adequate?
Yeah, so there's a couple of key pieces here. First of all, we take security very seriously. We have a philosophy of data in transit is encrypted, data in rest is encrypted, data stored on clients are encrypted. Those are bare minimums, they're non-negotiables. We've had clients come to us and say, we want to manage the encryption of what's on the mobile client, not you. We say no on that front. Now, having said that, the second piece of it is who owns that data? And what we're hearing is the companies want access to that data. They want it to be known that it's their data and not ours, especially the EU with the right to be forgotten policies. They have this ability to cancel account, and all information other than what the government and regulatory agencies require us to maintain must be deleted out of the systems, and we have to provide proof for that. But in terms of real flexibility, what I find most of the customers want is they want some ability to control their data. We have an open API platform, for example, you mentioned call recordings, where they can delete the call recording immediately after downloading it to a different cloud or to their own premise. We have some enterprises that only want those recordings in their physical buildings. Some enterprises are cloud open. Some enterprises are very specific to country regulation and so forth where that data is stored. So I think allowing that flexibility, understanding the future of this is that the data has to be decoupled from the switching network and the features so it can move anywhere. It can go in country. It could potentially even go on premise for those who want to do that. It can live closer to the customer, and they can take that data out and make sure it's purged on their own.
Okay. And Vishy, also as you're answering, I think one of the questions we also have is, even when you're in country, as Mike was mentioning, does that give us enough protection for the stability of the platform as well? Does that mean you have to have 2 data centers in each country? What's your approach to make sure we address both of those?
So I'm going to start at the top. I think from a privacy perspective, I think at AT&T, customer privacy is paramount. So in as much as new regulations come out, we operate in multiple geographies, not just in the US. So that's something that we keep a keen eye on in terms of updating our posture in regards to customer privacy. Right to be forgotten, all of those things absolutely we take very seriously. The other thing we do is, whether it's data at rest, data at encryption, etc. When we sit down, especially with customers who actually demand it, we make it available, but sometimes we have to sit down and have extensive security reviews which go through pretty much every part of the architecture end to end, the data flows, where data is stored, more importantly, who has access to it at AT&T. Some of our customers who happen to operate in the government space have requirements around ITAR, only specific citizens can have access. We've had to set up infrastructure, for example, for parts of the U.S. government, civilian agencies, which require specific separate infrastructure, separate cages. Only certified employees are allowed to actually get in, additional retinal scan, specific change control. I mean, all kinds of pretty extensive procedures required, but there's a cost associated with that. What was your the third question? I forgot, sorry.
Given that we also are concerned about reliability, does that require multiple data centers?
Yeah, so when we design data centers, we have a global footprint of data centers. So we look at both reliability, whether it's in region, but then also looking at if you're talking about real-time communications. So you have to account for where do you situate the data centers so latency doesn't become an issue, because there's reliability and then there's failover. And the way I look at it is, you need to be able to do that in a decent amount of time to accommodate the expectation of what the real-time and real-time communications means as well. So we absolutely include that in our kind of core design, kind of from the ground up, because even that's a big component of our core global network backbone itself.
Okay. Steve, I'm going to start with you on this one. From a perspective of what you hear back from your potential buyers, what are your prospects telling you when they're not buying? What is it that if your offering only had this, they'd say, now I could buy your solution? What are the reasons why you're not winning jobs?
Well, I'd probably answer that a different way, actually.
Okay.
So I'll just answer a different question. What we hear in a lot of cases is that people often do nothing or are doing very little. And one of the things we find repeatedly is when you look at sort of the way that often systems, and our average customer is in the 1,000 to several thousand users. So typically many offices, often spanning many countries, we find is Often those offices were acquired through acquisition. They're locally managed, and so one of the things that we see is that it can be very difficult to move from a situation where things are locally managed to one that's centrally managed. The other is, I think and this is one of the biggest things we see, is that there's concern that in the user community, shifting from a traditional legacy system to a cloud-based solution is going to be disruptive to the end users. And while that's for sure not the case, and the end users are going to end up with a better product, I think that concern, which some of it goes back to sort of historical issues, is something that we hear a lot. And that can span from very detailed things like operator consoles and people having sidecars, people have influence with executives, to very, very detailed functionality that has built up over time. And while those business processes may exist, they may not be the best ones, but they represent how people communicate with their customers. So I would say the biggest area of friction that we see tends to be around how do you get from point A to point B, how do you get from a legacy system to a cloud system without it being disruptive to the end user community. And I think that's something that we've focused on having a lot of rigor around, both from a platform standpoint, but also from a services perspective, and being able to really help our customers go step by step as we roll out and make sure we understand what they have. Because the biggest problem we see out there is that people don't even know what they have deployed out at their offices and throughout their enterprise. And because it's existed for so long, that leaves sort of a gap. That gap of knowledge is something that any cloud vendor has to help remedy and help them get a handle on.
So, similar question then, Curtis. What do you hear from customers that are saying, well, I'm not going to buy your solution? Why are they not buying your solution?
Yeah, so along a similar thread here is what we find from some of the customers that we talk to that decide not to implement a cloud solution, and when they make that decision, it's usually any cloud decision, is that we find that the people making the decision are not connected to the entire workforce or to the global, local, operational pieces that go with building out a phone system. They have a somewhat limited view of the company in terms of what they're able to see, as opposed to that broader ones. One of the main key pieces to that is people coming out of college today and coming into the workforce, the bright people we want in our companies in the future, they fundamentally communicate different, they collaborate different than we do. If you've ever seen 4 teenagers at a table, they don't talk to each other, they just text and then they all end up at the same restaurant. It's amazing. But I don't do that. I call my wife and we plan it out. Who bridges that and who makes sure that the person making that decision understands they have to bridge their existing global workforce with the next generation workforce in the same set of tools. And a lot of times it's hard to get that right decision maker. They're not necessarily always the CIO or the person that was running the previous communication systems, because it was too verticalized, and this is a very wide decision.
Okay. So,
can I just add to that?
Yeah, and I also want you to answer, I'm assuming that part of what I'm hearing is sometimes a hosted solution or a cloud solution is not right for a client. So, yes, please.
Yeah, so I think I'd probably take a different tack, which is we find that the customers who deploy cloud-based collaboration probably have one or more of the following kind of characteristics. So one is a senior leader. It doesn't have to be IT, could be somebody in business, who decides that how they collaborate within the organization has to fundamentally change. Whether it's because they want to attract millennials in their workforce, because they want to make sure that not necessarily the tools, but the collaborative style of working has to go through a kind of a step function change, which in turn requires much more agility from IT to deliver on those next-gen collaboration capabilities. So that's kind of one. The second piece is where IT leadership is comfortable with the fact that what cloud UC looks like today is probably going to be very different from what it looks like 12 months from now, 24 months from now. So those IT leaders who are comfortable with the fundamental principles of what cloud-based UC represents, and the fact that it is going to be a journey, and you acknowledge that there's going to be some uncertainty along the way, and not getting fixated on, I need to know exactly what it's going to look like in 18, 24, 36 months from now, those go ahead. And the third piece is building on what Curtis said earlier is those IT organizations which have a pulse on what is actually happening out in the trenches. Because the reality is, shadow IT, gray IT, whatever you want to call it, I think UC and collaboration is one of those places where it's probably much more rampant than what a lot of traditional IT organizations want to give credit for. So those IT organizations who have a good pulse that in some sense, the natives are restless, that either we provide the value and the tools that they need, or they're going to go find elsewhere because cloud-based UC makes it possible to do that. So it's some combination of those three attributes that we see kind of drive, the customers that we work with go to cloud-based UC.
Okay. So Mike, I'm going to go back to the original question a little bit, especially because of where Broadsoft sits in the marketplace. What is Broadsoft working on to increase its ability to be the right solution or the solution of choice for the folks that are buying out there? What are you working on to make it a more complete?
Okay, so I'll kind of preface this by sort of going back a few months and then sort of talk about where we're going from a future standpoint. So, one of the bits of feedback we got from our customers as they move into mid-market towards enterprise was they wanted a richer contact center solution as part of our portfolio. So we bought a company called Transera, who are ranked in the Gartner Magic Quadrant for contact centers. We're in the process of integrating that right now inside our broad cloud portfolio. Second bit of feedback is more mobility, a lot more mobility. So our customers are looking for a lot more ways of interacting with a cloud service, but from a mobile device. Okay, so we're actually increasing the portfolio of mobile options within the solution, and that's in two different ways. One is a very deep mobile integration with the current telco core, so we can do a lot of very smart stuff to make the user experience very simple. But then also refining the way some of the mobile clients work. So we've looked at the use cases and we've started to refine them down. So we're moving away, if you will, from the God client, which does everything and burns your battery away in the space of half an hour, to something which is far more focused. If you look at what Facebook have done with Messenger and the main Facebook app, we've learned some of those lessons and we're bringing out a set of clients which are focused around specific use cases, which will make the user experience a lot easier. Third area is application integration. So we're getting a huge amount of input around integrating with various other different cloud applications. So we said, okay, fine, yeah, we'll do that. But how do we then make that easier in terms of productivity? So, if you're working in Salesforce, does that interrupt you? Okay, if it does, then does that cost you time? So can we make that workflow easier? So we're doing workflow integration with application integration, okay? And that's a project which we call Tempo, which will be out, was actually in customer trials in Germany right now. And the other thing which we've done around that is looking at contextualization of communication. So say, for example, you call me, our systems will look at you and maybe do a LinkedIn dive. It'll pull up all our latest communication, messaging, email, and so on. Will present to me a view of you so that when we start our conversation, I'm not on the back foot. I've already got all the information at hand, so I can start that discussion quickly around maybe the documents we were working on previously. So again, that's part of Project Tempo and something we're in trials with. And finally, I actually had a debate at a conference a couple of weeks ago about this. Our big focus is about making stuff easy, right? Like, it's not all about millennials. I'm sorry, but there's an aging workforce out there. Your average life expectancy is increasing significantly. So the spectrum of people you've got to look after is going to be much wider. So we're looking at how we can take our clients and make them easier to use. We're looking at the consumer experience and trying to map that back into what we're doing from an interface into the end user. So, we bought a company called mPortal last year who just do customization of the user experience, so we can really drill down into specific markets and make some very bespoke products for some of our customers to meet certain vertical or horizontal requirements.
Okay, thank you. A little bit of marketing in there, but that's all right. He is a marketing guy.
Yeah.
Okay, Curtis, I'm going to start with you on this one. The cloud models traditionally have brought some of their advantages to end users by delivering calls across the internet. Of course, the internet being the internet hasn't always been the most reliable way to deliver calls. So what's your take on whether or not internet-connected services are going to deliver an acceptable quality, or what do you usually tell clients that are questioning whether or not that's the right model for them?
Yeah, so we talk to clients a lot about the quality of service that they want to have for their sites and how they want to connect those sites into the cloud, whether that's an existing MPLS network that they extend into our cloud spaces, or whether we do direct peering or direct connects in with the clients, or whether we offer other emerging technologies like software-defined WAN and things like that. One of the things we try to make sure that we establish is a reality check on how users are going to use the system. If we're truly enabling mobility, any device, anywhere, anytime, the reality is the end user is going to be using networks far outside the enterprise control. And so to make sure that that experience is top rate, we spend a ton of time and energy making sure the quality of service over the top of the internet is the best possible experience it can be. We measure each and every call, we measure each and every leg, we do diagnostics on the fly, we use highly adaptive codecs and things along these lines. So it's not a one network answer, it's really a mesh of networks that's going to truly answer that, but setting that expectation up front that if you really want this anytime, anywhere workforce, it's going to have to be network adaptable in order to thrive.
Okay. So Vishy, I'm going to add an additional part to this because you are AT&T's representative. Do you think it's necessary that your cloud services provider be a carrier in order to provide both the quality and integration solutions that customers are asking for?
I would answer it the following way. We believe that as AT&T, being the cloud service provider gives us some unique advantages. I think UC and collaboration by itself has some deep dependencies into investments that organizations have made into both LAN and WAN. And I think while customers, like Curtis said, sometimes customers say, you know what, I don't want any of the managed network experience. I'm just going to run it on plain, internet unmanaged. The expectation setting with the customer is that's okay, but here's our recommended design. From a quality of service, class of service perspective, these are the design principles that we want you to adhere to. And given the geographical distribution of the sites, the number of seats per site, given your existing network, this is our assessment of the kind of performance you can expect. I think the other piece is that customers typically look to us because as a global service provider, especially for mid to large global multinational corporations, if you're looking at cloud-based UC and collaboration at scale, we believe that our core DNA is around delivering global networks at scale and reliably. And I think that DNA carries over into what I consider another workload that just happens to run on top of our global network.
Okay. But Mike, a lot of your customers are not carriers, so how are they addressing the carrier challenges in order to deliver quality?
Well, most of them are, but yeah, the guys that are over the top, they generally have a two-phase approach. The first is they'll do pre-qualification of the sites. They'll speed up fairly simple bandwidth tests just to see whether or not at that moment in time, whether or not there's enough capacity there to handle the amount of traffic that's going to go through it. And then we supply a range of solutions that go above that, which basically constantly monitor the performance of the network, and we signal back early problems. So we anticipate if there's going to be an issue in the network, because the network is always changing, okay? I've had some old friends in a company called Sandvine, if anybody knows them, and they do deep packet inspection on core networks. I was chatting to their European CEO, and he was telling me that the worst time for data congestion is actually midday on corporate networks. It's when everybody stops for lunch and starts watching videos online, not 9 o'clock in the morning. And so these guys got all the data. They were showing me a 1,000 user enterprise was running 25 different non-certified messaging apps on their corporate network. So there's a lot of stuff going on out there which you just can't control, okay? So you need to be able to monitor what's happening in the background and then take the appropriate action as a result.
Okay. Steve, I understand Fuze has actually modified its approach to this over the years. So what's your take?
Yeah, well, I think first of all, there's no one size fits all. I think these kinds of problems are like anything else in IT. The first one that I'll point out is that what we've observed is that about 80% of the problems, quality problems, that people have in their offices are the result of misconfigurations on the LAN, not the WAN. So the first thing we do is help our customers assess what they have in terms of gear, configuration, and help them make sure they've deployed best practices throughout their local area networks in their offices so that they're going to get the best possible experience. The second is we realized early on that enterprise customers typically have their own MPLS networks or private networks from people like AT&T, and they don't want to change that. And so we've interconnected with over 100 different MPLS providers in North America, Europe, and Asia Pac. And so we want to accept virtually any network connection from any of our customers. Now that said, we're seeing a huge push towards mobile. We've seen a decline in the number of physical desk phones from what was 95% of the people getting a phone on their desk a few years ago to now 50-50, and we see that trending even lower. And what that means is that increasingly people's mobile device or their soft phone is their primary mode of communication. And when they have that, they expect the experience to be exactly the same when they walk out of the building as when they're on a quality of service network. And so that means really thinking about how the client is engineered, from the ability to deal with poor network conditions, how you still deliver high quality in video and audio, and do that. And a lot of that has to do with the implementation of the libraries, the techniques used around packet loss concealment, and other very technical elements. But those things generate a huge return in terms of quality of service, even when network conditions are less than ideal. And I think the reality is that's just the world we all live in. And so making that experience as optimal as possible under as varied conditions has to be job number one. But at the same time, understanding that people have made big investments in their networks and making sure they leverage that as much as they can as well.
Well, certainly expectations have changed. I can remember not that far back in my career where the Sprint ads where you could hear a pin drop, and now the ads are, "Can you hear me now?" But that's what cell phones have done for us. So if there's people in the audience that have a really good question they'd like to add, raise your hand and we'll pass out a microphone to you. If there isn't one right away, I have a couple of additional questions, but go ahead, sir.
Yeah, I'm not sure if this is a good question, but I'll still go for it. My question is for Vishy Gopalakrishnan, purely because of the size and scale that AT&T has in the US. How do you go about your pricing plans in terms of your go-to-market product portfolio? Does competition, because there may not be any high-end competition in the US to AT&T in terms of your portfolio. Is it a grounded pricing plan, or is it something that you do a TCO across 5 years?
So there's probably two questions in there. I think one is what we provide in terms of market-facing pricing. So the US is an extremely competitive market, as you guys can all attest to. It's extremely competitive. So we have to make sure that whatever pricing we put out in the market actually bears some semblance to reality in terms of what customers' expectations are. We have extensive TCO models that we sit down and walk through with customers. But again, in our opinion and our experience, I think those models are necessary but not sufficient for a lot of customers. Because I think over-indexing on just the TCO over 5 years, I think that can sometimes not give you the right perspective. As some of the other folks here on the panel said, there are implications on productivity, there are implications on agility, and I think there are implications from what is the role of IT? We had a large global chemical company. Their CIO basically told us, and this was just 6 months ago, he said, "I don't want to be in the PBX business. We are a global chemical company. What am I doing in the PBX business?" So I think when you have that kind of discussion, I'm not saying TCO is irrelevant. It is necessary, but it's one-off. several parameters that make up that customer buying decision.
Well, I'm curious, especially for RingCentral and Fuze, do you find your pricing has to adjust based upon what everybody else in the marketplace is doing? Is there that much pressure on you from what the AT&Ts are setting for price, or where Microsoft is coming in at pricing?
I'd say it's less about that specifically, and more that one, obviously there's a certain amount of spend that's going on in the existing world, and so we have to be mindful of what that spend is and need to provide real value. The second thing that we see, though, is people want simplicity, and they want simplicity in pricing, and they want that globally. And so one of the things we've rolled out is we have a global unmetered package for our customers where you can have users that live in one of 38 countries and get one flat fee across those. And that's something that we've heard a lot of demand for, is just one simple price so people understand what their costs are. And again, though, prices differ based on regions. And that's based on the existing cost bases that live in, or cost basis that live in those regions. And so it's differing. But I would say it's more a response to the telecom spend that's going on out there, and less, what these guys are charging versus us.
Yeah, and this may sound a little bit strange coming from the engineering and operations side of it, but the market sets the prices. We don't get to do that. We could discuss all day how we do that, but it's what value do you perceive? Is there a value in simplicity of pricing and simplicity of market for some companies, or maybe even a lot of companies? That may be very valuable. It's a very simple cost model. You can acquire companies and put those costs straight into a balance sheet very quickly and very efficiently, whereas other models might be time consuming. I think the market continues to set these price rates out there. There are a lot of good choices in the marketplace. Competition always spurs price wars in there as we try to win one, against the competition, and the competition, of course, tries to do that to us. I think that's all in your benefit, but ultimately you guys set the pricing.
So I'm going to twist up a little bit for Broadsoft because of the different nature of your market share. Given that so many of the end customers are on Broadsoft platforms through a variety of providers, how do they differentiate themselves? Is price one of the few things that's left? What do you see for the way that they're offering differences in value?
So sometimes they differentiate on price, not always. So for example, in the wholesale market, there'll be a wholesale price set, and then there's basically the retail price is up to the service provider in question. So if they've got, for sake of argument, fiber access into a market or into a geography where nobody else has, then they can change the price points associated with that. Prices also varies considerably by region. So for example, the Dutch market, which is probably the most advanced market in Europe today, is a significantly lower price point than the UK market, right? The reason for that is, there's actually less providers, but there's a lot of big providers who are competing with one another, and you've seen the price points driven down as a result of that. How do Broadsoft operators differentiate from one another? Generally, it's around, what is the customer journey? So what customer journey are they taking an SMB on, a mid-market on? What customer service do they have with that? What's the experience post-sale? How much training do they give? That's really where the differentiation comes in. In a lot of cases, they'll expose roughly similar feature set, but it's about how that is then customized. The way I look at it is, Broadsoft is an engine, right? But you don't buy engines, you buy cars. Okay, so it's the whole thing about, what's the dealer showroom feel like? How does the salesman make you feel? What does the car feel like? The smell of the leather? How many different options does it have on it? That's the way to look at it. And that's really how our customers market into the various different SMB market, big market, and so on.
Okay. Did we have another question that the audience wanted to ask? No? Okay. Oh, we do have one here, if that works.
Hi, yeah. I think it was Steve that mentioned it. You said one of the biggest problems is that people do nothing. It's that do nothing. So I guess I'm interested what the panel think in terms of what suppliers and vendors of UC services can do differently to capture those customers that are going to do nothing after they've heard all the wonderful things about UC.
Sure. Well, I think people aren't going to do nothing forever, which is a short answer. And I think there is sort of a wave of transformation that's happening now. Give you guys some data that sort of backs it up. 2016 is the year that CRM will be more than 50% in the cloud. And while it seems that Salesforce represents like the entirety of the market, they have 13% market share. And the difference between communications and the CRM market is that it's dramatically larger when you aggregate together all the different services that are there. So it is sometimes the case that timing is wrong for people, and I think we'd rather figure that out sooner than later when we're talking to people. But on the flip side, I think it goes back to the use cases. What we're seeing is a lot of interest in mobility, in video, in collaboration, and when you get that user experience right, that's what we see really shifting the needle for people. And so it is a matter of making sure, though, that those use cases map back to existing business process. So part of it is, prices come up a whole bunch. Price is part of it for sure, but we also look at what value we're going to deliver, how do we develop a plan to make sure that people are realizing that value, and then how do we map that back to specific use cases that tie to business process that's going to help people generate more business revenue and have happier customers on their end.
You want to talk about that?
I was just going to add, I think, a lot of times when we run into customers who do nothing, a lot of times it's usually a case of the mind is willing, but the flesh is weak. Because typically cloud means, at least the way they perceive is, what does it mean for my job? Do I touch and feel the equipment that was on-prem, whatever it may be, bridging equipment, PBX, etc. And I think addressing that is as important as the underlying technology. That loss of control, and so loss of control somehow gets equated to lack of performance, equates to what will my end users think. I've moved to the cloud and I've delivered a suboptimal service. So I think, but architecturally, I think a lot of the customers that we work with, they realize, they cannot do nothing for an indefinite amount of time, because the stark reality is, if they don't, the organization is going to find somebody else who's going to meet the business needs from an agility standpoint, collaborative ways of working. So I would say if you're a provider, in that entire kind of ecosystem, I think hone in on, and this may be kind of the softer side of kind of understanding the customer landscape, is where is the center of gravity in the IT organization, and what's driving that center of gravity? Because there is definitely, very simplistically, there's the kind of the network side of the IT organization, and there's the kind of the apps and the software side of the IT organization. And trying to figure out where the decisions are being made, how, what's shaping, and I think that's as important as the underlying technology itself.
I would just add one more thing here, which is the longer that people do nothing, the more likely it is that your end users are going to do something on their own.
Yep.
And I think clearly the IT landscape has changed such that if end users don't get the tools they need and want, then they're just going to go figure something else out. And so I think being stagnant isn't really a solution for very long.
Yeah, and adding on to that, the democratization of IT is what's going to drive in that user adoption in there. But mentioning what you mentioned before, the total addressable market for this particular service is so large. We estimate it's roughly 10 to 15 times that of just CRM alone.
Yeah, for sure.
And the markets we serve, not let alone the rest of the world. That's a long runway. So even if you're not doing nothing today, there's a lot of runway in there to make some of those decisions and go there as the products mature. But during that time, do expect that some of your users, some of your groups are going to be gray IT-ing and bring in their own solutions, running a team a different way. I think it was said earlier, some marketing organization or even an IT organization is going to want to be agile on the latest thing, and they're going to bring that in. They're going to let it coexist, and it's going to be sort of this land and expand instead of one big bang switch.
Well, I'm not sure if that's necessarily a bad thing from the business's point of view. So how many of you here work in IT? So most of the people that work in IT, they'd say, oh yeah, the IT needs to control it. We need to provide the users what they need. We want a single solution. But is it really better to have that single solution that tries to meet all needs Or is it better that we do, in fact, allow a business to bring in a best-of-breed solution? Maybe a really high-quality UC experience with video needs to work for the mobile sales force, but for the rest of the organization it doesn't. Should that only be driven by IT, or is it okay that that be driven by the business? And I'll let you start, Mike.
So I got a couple of points. If you look at selling UC, if you try and sell UC, you'll fail, right? Because you should be selling solutions to customers' problems. Okay, that's a bit of a cliche in the industry, but it really does hold true. You know, what is the customer issue, right? You know, are they having a customer service problem in terms of fielding inbound calls? Are they missing a lot of stuff? Therefore, you know, their customer service is going down, or they're missing revenue opportunities. So, you know, when we work with service providers, we coach them away from a product sale, right? We focus them towards what the use cases are and how they actually solve them. I think on the shadow IT question, a very good point someone made to me recently on shadow IT is, it's all well and good to get into a department, or, you know, 2 or 3 people start off, but over time it creates problems in itself, insofar as, you know, the people then say, oh, well, you know, I've got 20 people on it now, maybe I need to start thinking about the security implications of this. So it mushrooms out from an IT perspective, from just starting at one specific application, and it starts going into lots of different other areas. I need to integrate with Salesforce, this solution. I've seen some, you know, I've done some of it myself, right? I went out and procured a project management tool under the radar from IT, just because we needed it at the time. And, you know, you then start getting drawn into integration issues, security issues, which become a much bigger cost to the business over time. So at some point, it does need to be pulled back into the IT scope of control.
Okay. So we only have a few minutes left. I'd like to give each of you about a minute to say, what do you see as the future of cloud communications based upon the challenges we've talked about? Where are we going? Is it going to become such a dominant part of the landscape that we won't have prem solutions at some point in the future? I will start with Vishy, but give me a 1 minute each of you, if you would, on what you see as the future of this cloud communications.
I think like a lot of things in technology, I think cloud-based UC and collaboration, I think, you know, we are experiencing tremendous growth. I mean, we see it with kind of what our customers are doing, but I think, as Curtis said, the addressable market is so big that sometimes it's difficult to kind of assess or to actually get some perspective on that you are actually indeed making progress. It's probably not as evident on a day-to-day basis, but if you were to step back and look at in relative to the kind of the large market, addressable market, and the scope of what cloud-based UC can do, we still have a long ways to go, but I think we are on the right track. In terms of, you know, will prem-based solutions completely go away? You know, we deal with a lot of customers who are in heavily regulated industries, financial services, healthcare, who still have extreme reservations about going to cloud-based UC. Can I see a time where some of those reservations go away? Yes. Is that in the next 12 to 18 months? Probably not, especially for the customers that we deal with who are, you know, again, like I said, regulated industries, cross-border, they're not going to do that. So if anything, I just see tremendous opportunity for cloud-based UC. I think the other thing that's probably going to happen, and this is something that Mike touched on with what Broadsoft is doing with Project Tempo, is I would just encourage all of us to have a much bigger view of kind of the lens that we apply on UC, because I think we're going to find a lot of things that we don't consider part of UC or collaboration are going to start, you know, it's going to be a semi-permeable membrane. It won't be a hard membrane between this is UC and this is not. And sometimes I think we get into a lot of trouble by saying, oh, the UC kind of arena starts here and ends here. The reality is apps like Salesforce.com, Red Booth, whoever, all of these need to be woven into cloud-based UC. And I think we'll start seeing more of that in the future.
Okay. Got a minute?
So there's always going to be a reasonable amount of inertia in the market. Okay, so, you know, if you look at prem-based solutions, they're in some respects directly tied to the economic performance of a market. So if you go to someone like Italy now, people are writing down PBXs at like 12 years, right? Just because, you know, the economy is so weak in Italy.
So yeah, that's the reality of the situation. But every year, in the UK, there's like 2.5 million PBX lines come up for renewal. So that will happen, and you'll see more and more of those go to cloud-based solutions because there's going to be a lot more stronger cloud-based players out there. What's cloud going to look like? It's going to be more intelligent in terms of application integration. It's going to be more mobile. It's going to be more resilient. I mean, we're working on these things all the time, and I think you're going to see, as you see out there right now, most of the major players out there are cloud players, right? There's not many PBX players out there right now. The options are narrowing down, so it really will be very much a cloud-centric market in the next couple of years.
Okay. Steve?
Well, there are 400 million enterprise users around the globe. And at companies larger than 250 employees, less than 10% of those migrated their communications to the cloud. So to get to 50%, that's a big wave of transformation that's going to happen over the next several years. And the reason that a cloud vendor like us can deliver a substantially different experience is that we're iterating on our product every single day. Our customers are getting the benefit of new releases, new experiences, and we're using the data we get from our daily usage to make our product better. So fundamentally, there's a product that's improved every single day, and that's what leads to best-of-breed vendors in every segment. There's a reason that the Salesforces and Workdays and ServiceNows of the world exist, and I think it's a very exciting time in our space, and we're excited to be one of the people leading the charge in building next-generation communications.
So last word, Curtis.
Yeah, so I would say simply, the future of UCaaS is quite bright. I see the regular movement of the on-prem PBX as trust is built with providers, like some of the providers up here and others. As that trust is built, more and more prem equipment will come off. It'll be hosted in the cloud. Rapid innovation and cycle release is a key value proposition in that. Also, an adopting to what becomes the multimodal or the type of communications that might emerge in the next 12 to 18 months. The previous model of rolling out a PBX and living with that feature set for 6 years to 12 years, I think is largely limited for the vast majority of the enterprises out there, with some exceptions for hospitals that have very specialized communication needs and a few others, but very bright.
Thank you very much. I thank all of you for your attendance, and please thank the panel for their contributions today. Thank you. Thank you all.